All right, welcome back for another episode of the Barbell Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Brett Scott. With me here today is Coach Kevin Carr. Kevin has quite the background in the fields of rehab and strength and conditioning. So Kevin is co-owner of Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning, which a lot of you local people around the Massachusetts area might recognize that name, or the old Body by Boyle, which was also his thing back in the day. Kevin is a massage therapist as well, and you wrote a book, I believe, called Functional Training Anatomy.
Yep.
He's got that. He's also has created his own course with Mike Boyle called the Certified Functional Strength Coach. He owns his own massage therapy clinic or movement clinic called Movement is Medicine. He's taught internationally. He has his FMS, SFMA, NKT, FRC, FAPP, precision nutrition, postural restoration. And this guy's trained average Joes all the way up to high school, collegiate, and various Olympians as well. So this guy knows his stuff, and I'm excited to just kind of chat with, talk some shop with you today. So first of all, one of the big things that people always want to know or always talk about when your partner is brought up here is the back squat. So Mike has been famous for being against the back squat or just not utilizing it in practice. So I want to hear about that because I saw him speak at a Perform Better Summit a few years ago, but I don't really remember. I remember him saying, I think he said he still doesn't utilize it, but his belief in why has changed drastically over the years with what's come out. So do you want to talk about that a little bit for us?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I was lucky enough to kind of be there when this transition from heavier bilateral squatting towards a more unilateral or split stance approach for our lower body training kind of happened. Like when I started at MBSC, we were still doing much more bilateral squatting. And we kind of slowly transitioned mainly because for a couple reasons. One, there are a lot of athletes who just didn't like it, but many of them are hockey players or a large population kind of complaining about back pain, back stiffness, especially as loads went up or volumes went up. And we always kept asking, like, is there a better way for us to develop lower body strength without relying so heavily on the back squat? And it's just a funny thing because, you always hear people say, like, no exercise is necessary. We can always find other options. But when you say that about the back squat, people get really upset. And I think that it's one of those things that, strength and conditioning for athletes is so heavily influenced by traditional strength sports, powerlifting especially, in that we take many of those tools that are 100% necessary for things like powerlifting. Obviously, you have to back squat if you want to powerlift. And we take those things into the training of athletes. And where there is a mismatch is that training is a means to an end for the athletes that we work with. And we don't necessarily have to use those tools to get people bigger, faster, stronger, healthier for their sport. And so what we were finding is we were having a lot of athletes who, it didn't always look great when loads got heavy. The point of failure in a back squat's very rarely when you see a back squat go bad is their lower body. You'll never really see a back squat fail where they're perfectly upright. It's pretty much they dump forward. And so we're having athletes who say, my back's a little stiff, back's a little sore. And so we really shifted initially towards rear foot elevated split squats to be our primary lower body exercise. So kind of split stance. I think you're probably about 80-20 front leg to back leg. And what we are finding is that we were able to get really high loads, get great training effect in the lower body without necessarily the downsides of the compressive loading on the back for the athletes. And so we really kind of leaned into that transition. And what we found is our athletes felt better, they were healthier, they were getting stronger. And I think from our perspective, we were seeing a lot of value from a split stance and unilateral standpoint translating to the positions and postures they need when they play sports. And so for us, we've really kind of moved entirely that direction, almost entirely to true single leg work in a lot of cases for a lot of our athletes as well, with things like single leg squats and skater squats and gone pretty far down that road. And when you talk about kind of the why changing, I think people like Alex Natera, for those of you listening, he's a researcher and rugby-based strength and conditioning coach out of Australia, has done a lot of great research looking at unilateral loading with things like force plates. and really diving into the ideas behind things like the bilateral deficit. And when he started sharing some of his research with us, it opened our eyes up even more that we were finding like we're able to get much greater than 50% loads on one leg with our athletes. And so we're essentially getting a more efficient training effect with many of them. So for us, we've leaned pretty heavily into unilateral approach as these years have gone by.
I'm going to just interrupt you real quick. Your mic is catching your shirt there quite a bit. I'm hearing it pick up, so I don't know if you maybe need to lean forward or...
Okay, yeah, I'll come like right here.
Yeah. Yeah, it just keeps like catching your neck there.
Yeah.
But, so with the why too, I think this is something that is still misunderstood by physical therapists, some personal trainers, and just the general population really is, part of that why is we used to think that compressive forces and loads on the back were just inherently bad no matter what. And everyone says squats are bad for your back. It's like, well, too much of anything can be bad for your back, right? So, and it's like, oh, we're compressing nerves, discs, we're deteriorating joints, whatever. But I take it Mike's theory, or you guys as a whole have changed the theory on that, being that for you guys, it's probably just not as much worth it in general for the time you have with people, specificity to sport, and yeah, really like, is the juice worth the squeeze to do a back squat when, yeah, it's just not as natural of a movement too, and not everyone has like the hip clearance and things as well.
Yeah, so if you think about kind of our population, we have a lot of kids who are coming in, many of them are skating 365 days a year. They're always on the ice. So you have these kids with a huge kind of anterior posture who struggle with deep bilateral squatting. And then to be like, am I going to spend a lot of time trying to hammer this back squat for them from a technique standpoint, or am I going to simply put them in split stance or put them in unilateral and be able to get the training effect I want with less downside? For us, it's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as a powerlifting coach and weightlifting coach, like, I love the back squat, but there is quite a bit of learning in stages of like motor control you have to get through to really, hone in on the skill of back squatting that I think a lot of people too underestimate. And it is an easy lift to put a lot of weight on a bar and crank up. And it's like, yeah, are you just jamming up the front of your hip? Are you smoking your low back? Are your positions any good at all? Do you have any sense of like internal and external cueing of what you should be thinking about doing with it? I think if we look at a hockey player, right, like they're skating so much anyways, they shouldn't be putting a huge amount of time into training, except in the off season, but in season hockey is quite a long time. So it's like, yeah, does it really become worth it for a hockey player, or even most field type athletes, to back squat?
Yeah, I mean, in reality, all season is in season. The way youth sports has moved, right? Even when I started in like 2008, kids had like a true off season. There was much less year-round hockey. Now it's like the kid plays for the school team, they play for a club team, they play for a travel team. So it's almost always in season. So at best, we're getting 2 to 3 lifts a week. And so how do we make the most use of our time to get the most training effect and to make sure they're feeling good so they can continue to compete or practice or do what they need to do? And so for us, that was kind of a natural progression for us. And one thing I always try to make clear to people is it doesn't mean we don't bilateral squat. I mean, the first thing all of our young middle school kids do, our 11-year-olds, our 12-year-olds, they learn goblet squatting. They learn front squatting because we teach them to Olympic lift. And so what we find is those are just easier tools. A front load is going to help them with their chest posture. It's typically going to help them develop the trunk strength that we want in a bilateral pattern. And so all of these kids are going to come in, they're going to go through a front squat pattern, they're going to go through goblet squatting to develop some strength. And typically we just transition most of that lower body work towards split stance and unilateral as they've been with us a little bit longer.
Do you guys barbell front squat at all?
Yeah. So when we teach them to Olympic lift, they're going to go through kind of front squat complex with that. And then what is important to also realize is we have a lot of college kids who train with us from the summer. So they're with us from May to the end of August. And we have to take into account, what is their expectation with their strength coach when they go back to school. And sometimes it's back squatting, sometimes it's front squatting, whatever it might be. We're going to train that lift over the summer, because the bottom line is it's our job to prepare them for whatever they're going to have to do when they get to their school. And if they're not prepared to test, if they show up and they're weak, they're slow, they're deconditioned, that's going to affect their playing time. It's going to affect, what are they paying for us to do is to prep them. And so, if you come in here in the summer, you'll see kids front squatting and back squatting, because if that's what their expectation is when they get to their team, we have to get them ready for that. And so at the bottom line is that we're here to get them ready. And so whatever the tool is we need to do that, we'll use.
Do you have any place where you find there is utilization of a back squat outside of you want to get your back squat stronger?
Not necessarily. I tend to always choose, and this is obviously a bias of mine from being here for a long time, is like, if I'm going to bilateral squat most people, I tend to choose front squats, and we'll load those pretty heavily. Just because I find that, it's easy to teach. I tend to have less downside. I can get the ball right on the front, whether it's in like an Olympic style grip, or even if I have people with wrist limitations, having them grab straps and go for it. That's pretty much going to be my choice most of the time for a bilateral option.
So you just don't really find much utility at all in the back squat as far as performance goes?
Yeah.
Interesting. And then it was actually interesting. I just had Devin McConnell on. Are you familiar with Devin?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So he was saying, because he's he's the director of performance for the Utah Hockey Club now. Yeah. Formerly the Phoenix Coyotes, and he was saying they don't even have guys doing Olympic lifting anymore.
Yeah, he had a thread on Strength Coach kind of discussing that and how they've kind of moved away from even worrying about teaching Olympic lifting, so more loaded jumping variations and things of that nature.
Yeah, and his thing, which kind of baffled me, is like, we don't have the time with these guys. I was like, pro hockey players don't have the time to learn this stuff. And he was saying a lot of guys are coming in that haven't had the training in it or the experience with it, where it's just like, from a team perspective, we've got to put our eggs elsewhere, I guess, in different baskets. So,
and if you can get the force production and the loading with things like a loaded jump, why are you going to take the time to teach a 25-year-old kid who's never done it the time to Olympic lift? I do understand, like, the benefit that we have and why we like Hankling is we have a lot of these kids at 11, so I can have them out there with a 15-pound bar for the first couple of weeks just working on form before we start to put load on it. So then by the time they get to 14, 15, 16 years old, they can start to move some appreciable weight. But if you think about him, he maybe has 3 hours a week of lifting with these guys. Sometimes you think, okay, what's the best tool I can choose for the job? And maybe that's a better option.
Yeah. Part of what he was saying too is a lot of these guys, hockey in the NHL is an international sport now. And they, people in other countries, they just don't have access to this, or they're not familiar with it as much, which is interesting because the U.S. has been like traditionally the worst at the sport of weightlifting. We're getting better now, finally, but it's taken us a while to get there. But if it is a tool you had, is it one you would still use? Because, like a box jump or some type of bodyweight plyometric, you can learn to generate a lot of force. And I'm biased here as a weightlifter. I feel like it's a great way to develop force production is to lift heavy weights in an Olympic style manner, if you have the time and skill and everything else. Yeah,
I think I was talking about this with our staff in that we utilize both like trap bar loaded jumping as well as like a hang clean. And when you look kind of at the data on the two things, I think you get a lot of value out of both of them that might be a little bit different. When you look at the value of something like a hang clean, rate of force production tends to be really, really high, higher than a loaded jump variation. And so obviously in the sporting environment, the rate at which you can produce force is really, really valuable. And, there's really not many power exercises where you're going to be moving that much load at that rate of speed, like a hang clean or a snatch or something along those lines. And so for us, I like it for that reason. Then when you look at things like peak power outputs, things like loaded jumping are typically going to be much higher than a hang clean because you're leaving the ground and you're dealing with that rapid eccentric contraction on the ground. That's also really valuable. And so the question becomes, how do you fit it all in the program? That's always the logistical challenge for coaches like us, is where do these things go? And our summer program where we have these athletes in for 4 days, we can typically fit both of those things in. And I guess the rate limiter is always, what do I have the time and the coaching and the logistics to be able to program? Because I think they're both really valuable.
Yeah. And so when you're looking at these different factors or variables of peak force production and rate of force production, how would you say those things, where do those things fit, or what are you looking at as far as how do those translate into physical performance for someone? Like, what is the difference between the two?
Yep. So think about this. So like rate of force production, how quickly can I go from not moving to rapidly accelerating myself, or in the case of, something like handling the bar, right? That is that first push off, right? For that, if I'm thinking about a hockey player, hey, I'm stopped, or I'm in one end, I have to accelerate
Change
quickly
direction.
the other way. The other, yeah, exactly. Football player, same thing, pushing off the line. Whereas peak force, if we're thinking about the amount of force we can put in the ground, when we're thinking about things like top speed running, jumping, things like that, really, really matter. And so I think whenever we think about building a program, when we going from things like plyometrics, they're going to be really high speed and really high force, but lower load, towards things like loaded jumps or hang cleans that are going to be somewhere in the middle, where there's going to be higher loads and higher speeds, to things that we get in the weight room where the force actually isn't that high, trap bar, but the loads are going to be really high. All of these things are valuable across the spectrum. And I think in a good program, at least the one that we try to build, we think, how are we touching all of these different things to give an athlete as much general preparation as we can over the course of a program?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to you guys teaching hang cleans, I know you guys have kind of, I don't know if it's a trademark, I would say, but you guys use kind of that, like the hip rock back and forth, as I would define it. I don't know if you guys have a better name for it, or.
Yeah. Now, well, it's funny because it's not something that we intentionally teach as much as I think it's a habit that a lot of athletes start to figure out, which is one of those things when you think about it, you're like, I have a lot of really good athletes who have kind of do this where they'll sit back, rock, get that rapid eccentric contraction so that then they can pull the bar up quicker. That's when it's so funny. We have like a teaching progression we go through that we kind of took off of this kind of Glenn Penlay progression where it's, hands-free front squat, position 1, position 2, and go. That's how we teach them. What you end up seeing is some of these athletes just starting to figure out, hey, if I lean back a little and then I get a little bit of a quicker drop, I get a better stretch reflex and I can pull that bar up. Not something we really coach, but also not necessarily something I'm going to coach out as long as the rest of it looks good. Because my number one concern when it comes to Olympic lifting from an athletic development standpoint is, can I get that bar moving quickly? And can I get them to extend their hips and get that bar up to their chest? If that's the end result and it looks pretty, outside of that, those elbows are getting through, then I'm probably not going to coach that out.
Yeah, it's one of those things of, like good athletes figure out easy ways to do things almost, or compensate around things really well. Like, I remember seeing like LeBron James can't pass an FMS score, but he's the best basketball player, like known to man.
Yeah.
So yeah, if a good athlete like figures this out, it's like, do we let them do that? Do we force them outside of the box to do it a different way? Do we let them be an athlete and do it their way?
It's amazing how much we can actually learn sometimes from watching them do things.
Yeah.
And then how using that to kind of inform our coaching in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, like objectively, one of the best athletes I've ever coached, just intuitively knew how to do certain things. And the moment you cued her to do something different, fell apart.
Yeah.
Like 60, 70%, you're like, hey, try to do this. And it'd be like, she literally would fall on the ground.
Yeah.
And it's like, all right, never mind. Just keep being an athlete. Just go out there and do what you're doing. And let's see where that takes us sometimes. And so will you guys always will you let them always rock? Or are there times you have them go from like a static hold position straight up into a clean?
When I'm teaching younger kids, I'm pretty strict about the setup and the pull, because a lot of them, these kids who are like 11 or 12, they don't have that nervous system that you talked about where they're figuring out how to do things that benefit them. They're just, throwing darts at the wall and trying to figure out how to get the bar up. So when I teach them, it's very much command clean. Like on day one, I'll be like, hey, on command, we're going hands free front squat. Then on command, we're going front squat. Then it's position one. So kind of just a little knee bend. I'll say, everyone there, pull. They'll all jump, catch and hold. It gives me an opportunity to go and coach. Then we get down to that position two, deeper hip hinge just above the knees. I'll say, everybody hold there. All right, jump, shrug, catch. Everyone hold. So I'll kind of really coach those kids hard to the point where once it looks good and we're starting to put weight on the bar, then I'll give them a little bit more leeway from there. When the times that I'll kind of slow them down is when they're getting a little too fast, their hips aren't getting through to the bar, you're seeing them kind of rock and not get their hips extended. That's when you maybe want to take them and say, okay, let's slow it down a little bit. And work on our setup position a little bit more. If they're kind of moving that bar quick and they're getting their hips through and they're catching it well, then I'll let it be.
Yeah. That's funny too. Like you kind of mentioned, I see way too many weightlifting coaches get bent out of shape when strength coaches, like athletic strength coaches, there's a greater bandwidth for error for an athlete than a weightlifter specifically.
100%.
And people are like, well, it's all over Instagram and stuff too. People like shitting on people left and right. If this person should have done this, and that's like, well, this isn't their sport. And it's just, there's lots we can look at from a technical perspective with weightlifting. But even like I have some of my weightlifters get upset with me when I have a 15-year-old hockey player that I'm teaching to do a hang power clean. They're like, why are you all up his ass about like XYZ? It's like, well, he's not trying to do this as a sport, and he's lifting more than you, and this isn't his sport. So you should take notes.
Exactly.
So it's interesting because I think some people too overcomplicate a hang clean when it's just for sport.
Exactly.
And it's, as long as it's safe, I'm pretty much okay with it. Because what are the big things you're looking for when you're coaching a hang clean to an athlete that's not a weightlifter?
One, bar speed. The biggest cue I always say is like, I want to see you get that bar from just above your knees up to your chest as fast as you can. Like the intent of moving that bar aggressively. Getting those hips extended and thinking about pulling those hips to the bar. Those are the two big things I want to see. If they were getting those things, then I'm probably getting the training effect that I want. Because ultimately that's what we're working on, is like we said, that rate of force production and that explosive power in their lower body. Yeah.
And so when you guys are teaching the clean, or you're letting that hip rock happen too, do you guys care that the hips are shooting like forward? Like if you're looking at them from the side, do you care at all that the hips are going like forward past the ankles at all and pushing the bar forward, as long as they're moving the bar fast?
As long as they're moving the bar fast, I just don't want to see their whole body move, right? The one tendency you see with these kids is like they drift either forward or backward or whatever. I want to see, I said, like, you see where your feet are now, you should be coming down right in that same space. Yeah. As long as they're kind of controlling their whole center of mass, then I'm okay with it.
Yeah. That's kind of what I figured, but I wanted to clarify with you guys just to see for myself. And then the going back to single leg stuff a little bit more, the bilateral deficit, as you mentioned. So there's like this phenomenon that a lot of people don't know about. So do you want to touch on that and tell people about what the bilateral deficit is and how it works?
Yeah. Well, what you'll see, and this is particularly true with lower body, especially like knee dominant lifts, is that in the bilateral deficit, you're going to see your athletes are going to be able to lift greater than 50% on one leg compared to what they can do on two, right? So, I mean, if I have kids who could, front squat 300 pounds, a single leg squat with 150 pounds, they'll be able to do that. And that won't be nearly as challenging as a bilateral squat with 300 pounds. And so I think part of it is, neurologically, I think the way that we're wired is we're able to get greater than, 50% of that horsepower into one leg when we're using it. And so when we think of it that way, what we often think of it is it's just a more efficient way for our athletes to develop some lower body strength. Because the rate limiter isn't at the trunk very often, right? Whether the weight's in the hands or they're in that split position, they're able to generate more force upwards. And so it was really interesting when we looked at the Alex Natera research. What he was looking at was force production relative to body weight in things like bilateral back squatting, split squatting, single leg squatting. And what he found on the force plates essentially was that these athletes were able to, at a single leg squat done with 50% of their body weight load, was about the equivalent force production to a double body weight back squat with the same athlete, right? And so take myself, I'm like 220 pounds, 110 pounds in a single leg squat, which is 50% of body weight. We see that pretty commonly with our athletes. Was about the equivalent to about 440 pound back squat from a force production standpoint. And so what we're seeing is we're seeing athletes get way above that from a relative loading standpoint in both things like skater squats or true single leg squats all the time. And so we've really tried to push the aggressive loading in these single leg movements, where we often see people treat these as assistance exercises. We're going down to sets of 3 and sets of 5 that we really want them to load heavily and aggressively, because I think we could squeeze a lot of value out of these movements where we previously looked at them as, assistance exercises.
And I think you just said, 110 pounds of load for you in a single leg position.
Yeah.
Would give you the equivalent training effect as loading a 440 pound back squat?
From a force production standpoint, yes.
Okay. Which is, with athletic development, a big part of what we're looking at.
Yeah.
So just from a risk to reward standpoint, that sounds like a really good choice.
Yeah, exactly. And so I also think about these athletes who have competing athletic endeavors they have to do outside of just being in the weight room, right? And so from a nervous system standpoint, although they might be sore, I'm not sure that they get as much kind of nervous system fatigue from some of the single leg movements, just because the total system load is lower. And so for us, it tends to be a good option. Like you said, risk reward and total fatigue, it tends to work really well for us. Yeah.
And then, are you guys doing anything with, when I was at UMass Lowell, Devin was big on the Hatfield RFE or Bulgarian split squat. Are you guys doing, because I myself, I have FAI in both my hips. So back squatting to me, is not that fun anyways.
Yeah.
And I think I'm limited by pain on them. So I think my best squat, just again, pain being a limitation, is 405.
Yeah.
To a box.
Yeah.
Where I've loaded 415 for triples on a Bulgarian single leg squat.
Exactly.
So are you guys, what are the big movements you guys are loading?
Yeah.
So you said, that 3 to 5 range.
We'll use that Hatfield technique for the athletes once they start to really push the load with the dumbbells in an RFE. It's unquestionably, you can load much greater with a Hatfield holding the rack with a safety squat bar. So once they start to really push the load with 2 dumbbells and a vest and chains, once it starts to get ridiculous for them to keep doing RFEs with all this body weight load, and it's just hard to hold, once you get 120 pound dumbbells in each hand, at some point you're that limiting factor is your grip.
Yeah.
And so we'll move them to do the Hatfield. So we'll get the safety squat bars, get the handles on the rack, and go from there. So we'll push those really heavily. True single leg squatting will really start to push, as well as skater squatting. So with a single leg squat, typically weight vests and then a Zercher load with the sandbags. We're getting people up to 1 times body weight in some of those.
Like a skater squat variation?
No, like a standing single leg squat, like a pistol, but to a box.
Okay. So on the box, you're saying?
So the way we'll do it is we line up a 6-inch box in front of an 18-inch box.
Okay.
So they're going to a 12-inch depth, which is well below parallel for pretty much everybody. And once we start to add load to that movement, once they get past body weight, it's typically weight vests, chains, and a sandbag at their chest. And they're squatting down to that box and then coming up. And so we're loading that up to 1 times body weight for a lot of people. Is then also additionally on another day, typically a skater squat, which is going to be more hip dominant. And we've done that both with safety squat. I've had athletes in a front squat position doing that with a barbell, as well as chains and sandbag Zercher position as well.
This might be a stupid question, just the way I'm visualizing it.
Yep.
But if you're in an 18-inch box and they have a 6-inch box in front of them, you said? So it's a 12. Why don't we just do a 12-inch box?
Because typically they need a little clearance for that leg, right? I don't want them to have to try to do a pistol where they bring that leg straight out in front of them, right? Oh. And so sometimes the issue is actually the free leg. Where does it go, right? Yep. And so by elevating them on a 6-inch box, it lets them, you position them on the edge so that leg can kind of hang to the side, right? And then it kind of takes that leg out of the equation. What I don't want them to try to have to do is flex that free hip up just to try to not touch the ground, right?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. Okay. And then part of that too, one of the things I see as a strength coach, like you said too, of people treat these like accessories. And even in that case, I see so many people, and I'm always yelling at my athletes, and maybe you guys are too, of like, no one wants to push the single leg work heavy.
No.
It's like, guys, like I have guys that can squat like 500-600 pounds.
Yeah.
And then I see them doing like split squats with like 25-pound dumbbells. And
Yeah,
I'm like,
come on, man.
I'm like, what the fuck? Like, I'm like, this is literally like 5% of your load.
Yeah.
And you're even stronger in this position. What are you doing? And it's like, you caught me.
Yeah.
So, can you just reinforce for me so I can share this to my clientele that's milking it every day, to tell them how strong they are on one leg?
Yeah, it's really a mindset thing, because I know when we first started moving that way, people were just naturally resistant. One, because they thought of it as assistance work. Two, because it's hard, because you get done with one leg and then you still have to do the other leg, right? And so us demonstrating as a staff, like getting us ourselves doing it and getting really strong and demonstrating to the athletes, like, hey, we can really push this a lot more than we thought. And continuing to say, hey, we're only going to do 5 reps. So like, you got to think like that 5th rep should be the last rep you have in the tank. And when we started really, building a culture and a mindset around, hey, we're going to push these, everybody got a lot stronger. But they are naturally resistant, because RFEs are not necessarily an enjoyable exercise for people to do. Single leg squats, I like them personally. I like single leg squats, but most of my athletes are like, oh shit, we got single leg squats today. And I'm like, yep, well, you had 100 pounds last week. We got to try to go for 105 this week, and like letting them know, like, hey, that's we're gonna push this just like we did your deadlift.
Yeah. And with the bilateral deficit there, you said 50%, but I've seen, and this was a while ago, but literature saying like you can be 70% stronger on one leg versus two, or up to 70%, have 70% the strength. Is that still?
Yeah. Well, so when I said 50%, what the Unilateral research was that, if you had a 50% body weight load, it would be equivalent to like a double body weight load. But yeah, I think 70% stronger from one side to 2 legs is probably pretty accurate when we look at it. I mean, like I said, I had a kid this summer single leg squatting like 200 pounds on one leg. I could tell you really pretty easily that like that's he was repping that for like 8 reps.
Yeah.
And so if I tried to translate that to him back squatting, I would tell you that's probably right around that number.
Yeah. Of like 300 something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then something else I'm always curious about too with you guys of how do you program it so everyone kind of has a dominant forward leg?
Mm-hmm.
How do you guys go about mixing that up? Or ideally, do you start with your weaker leg forward first? Do you start with a stronger one? Do you have certain rest periods between legs you do? Is it continuous?
I tend to tell them start with the weaker leg, just because even though we're going to take some rest in between, you're going to have some general system fatigue.
Yeah.
So I'll say like, or just at least don't always start with the same one, right? Yeah. Things that like you or I might inherently think to do naturally, most of our athletes will not. They're going to bias doing their favorite leg first. So I'll say, hey, put your non-dominant leg or your weaker leg out first. Let's get that one, and then go to the second one. And then give them some time in between legs. Like I'll say, like, especially if you're holding big dumbbells, put them down for a minute, catch your breath, go, then pick them up. Let's go back to the other leg. Yeah. Because it can be, one, cardiovascularly demanding as well as neurologically exhausting when you have a lot of heavy loads and something like an RFE.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you guys are programming, say you're doing like a heavy-ish set of 5 on like a Bulgarian split squat.
Yeah.
How much time do you typically like give them between legs? And then I guess after they've done both legs, how much time before the next set?
Yeah. Typically we're always doing things in either pairings or trisets. For our heavier lifts are typically always going to be in pairings. So like, I think this summer, RFE was paired with like a row, like an upper body pull, right? And so that allowed us to take more rest in between, because we're not trying to fit in 3 exercises in that block. So, they would maybe do a set of 5 on one side, take a minute, do a set of 5 on the other side, go do whatever that non-competing upper body exercise, like a dumbbell row or an inverted row, and then come back. They'd be 3 minutes later probably, and then come back and do the next set. And that typically worked pretty well for us. Our stronger guys, we give them a little bit more time. They're going to take a little longer. Our younger kids, like, middle school girls, don't need nearly as much rest periods. And so we tend to build a little bit more time around those groups, like our pro groups and our college groups, so that they have a little bit more longer periods for rest, because their loads tend to be significantly higher.
Yeah. And so where do you see people going the most wrong with their training when it comes to athletic development?
I think that for a long time, we've been really influenced on the strength side, which isn't wrong. Like I love lifting weights as much as the next person. But I think sometimes we forget that the speed, power, force component that might be aside from just lifting weights, whether it's plyometric progressions, really trying to dial in regular plyometric progressions every single day, or exposure to high velocities and things like sprinting, for all of our athletes. I think for a long time, I think we discounted the value of that, personally. And when I go around and go to a lot of gyms and teach, I tend to see much less of an emphasis on those things. Whereas you think about how our athletes compete, they're playing at high speeds and really high forces that we can't necessarily replicate in the weight room. And so I think we need to include something in the program, whether it's, heavy depth drops, or, really elastic plyometric progressions, or high velocity sprinting, max effort sprinting. Those are things that we need to make sure we're touching on the force and velocity spectrum that I think many people miss.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, lifting with your dad in the basement, or your dad wants to do bodybuilding. That doesn't necessarily, it might translate to bigger muscles, but big muscles aren't always fast muscles. Yeah,
and don't get me wrong. Listen, if they're a high school kid lifting weights is ahead of 90% of his peers, because a lot of them aren't doing anything. But then we think about, how can we really maximize that hour or 90 minutes we might have with an athlete, making sure we're spending time doing those higher speed or higher force movements, I think is really, really important, especially as athletes get up to higher levels of performance, and we're thinking about trying to reduce incidences of injury. Velocity has a really big impact.
Yeah. And so how would you say that strength training, even if we're doing strength training, right, like we're doing a lot of the single leg work and putting a big emphasis on that, how does that translate to speed?
So it's part of the equation, right? So being able to put force in the ground or maintain postures while we sprint has everything to do with strength. I was talking to a parent about this the other day. What's the big thing every parent comes in and says, like, especially the middle school kid who's kind of in that awkward growth spurt. They say, hey, can we work on my kids' running mechanics? Like, their running mechanics look kind of goofy or uncoordinated. And I could tell them, hey, I could sell them some bullshit about, hey, we're going to do all these speed drills and we're going to do a speed camp. But the fact of the matter is, if this kid isn't strong, he doesn't have hip strength, lower body strength, trunk strength, to get in the postures to put force into the ground efficiently when he runs, none of that matters. And so what I always tell them is, get them in the program. As they get stronger, they're going to get faster solely because structurally they're able to get into those good acceleration postures because they're strong enough, and they're able to push more force into the ground. But then the other side of the equation is the velocity component of being able to do that, because there's a lot of really strong guys who are super slow. And then there's a lot of, maybe not really strong guys and girls who are really, really fast. And so being able to get both sides of that, I think is really important. So we need to get these stronger guys and girls faster by exposing them to high velocities or really high force movements where they're doing things like plyometrics, so that they can translate that into sprinting.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how many powerlifters you've seen sprint, but some do, and some can do it pretty well, but a vast majority of them are not sprinters by any means. And it's like, I forget who it was, but it was like, if you move a lot of weight, as maximally, but it's really slow, that's you're training to be a tugboat.
Yes.
That's a whole different realm than being able to create a lot of force in a fast amount of time.
Exactly.
So
exactly, because like you think about it's the combination of the speed and the load together when you talk about things like power output or maximal force output. And so going back to kind of the question you asked before, how do you put all these things in? I always think across our program, I want to think, are we doing things on the across that entire spectrum? And I think for a long time, we were really good at getting kids stronger, but our max velocity sprinting speed development was probably lacking to a degree. And once we started to prioritize that, we saw these athletes get faster objectively because we're timing their sprints regularly and measuring their verticals regularly and seeing those things go up. And once you started measuring it and really us putting time towards developing it, we saw that those numbers move.
How much of an influence has just timing the kids' speed improved their speed too?
Complete game changer for us. Because, I mean, again, next to improve my kids' running mechanics, actually probably the biggest question we get from prospective athletes and their parents is, can you help me get faster? And to that, my first question is, well, how fast are you? And we couldn't answer that question initially because we didn't know. Because you're not timing them, I can't tell you how fast you are.
Yeah.
Once we started measuring splits regularly, one, I can tell you how fast you are, and then I can see where you're improving. And probably even more importantly, they can see how fast they are, and they can compare to their peers. The objective feedback every single time you run a flying 10, and then the comparative experience to you and your peers gets them to work harder, without a doubt. Kids would come in and run 90% all the time until we put the timers out. Now they all run 100%. And so getting that objective feedback is priceless. And then we automatically get feedback as coaches as is what we're doing working? And is there a change in their technique or progression over the program that is lending them to getting faster? We can see those results, which is really, really important.
What happens to the slowest kid in the class, though? That was probably me as a child.
Well, so that used to be our fear. I will tell you 100%. So we've always had two facilities. This is a really good story. Before Middleton, we had North Andover, right? And Steve Bunker, shout out to Steve Bunker, he's been with us forever. He always timed kids up there. We had the Browers from day one when I was up there in 2008. We had the Browers set up and we were timing kids. And Mike was always really resistant to it. And he didn't want us doing it. In fact, we were just doing it anyways because he was in Woburn or Winchester most of the time. And he was really resistant to it because he said, how does it make the slowest kid feel? Right?
Yeah.
And so we didn't do it. But the reality is we had a lot of fast kids in North Andover and we had a lot of kids in Winchester who weren't running as fast as they could when we would do our sprint work because they didn't have feedback. Mm-hmm. When we started doing it, I've never seen a single kid in our group say, I don't want to run because I'm not fast. The slowest kid, because we group everyone by age level, they're all still within like one standard deviation of each other. And so what you end up seeing is these kids run harder. They 100% demands effort. And over time, you have this self-organization effect you see, especially in these middle school kids who, yes, they're getting stronger. So posturally, they're able to get in better positions over the time that they're with us. But the more effort they put into max sprinting, the better they get at it. And I think that we're doing them a disservice if we're worried about necessarily, oh yeah, I'm going to be the slowest kid in the class, because at the end of the time, they end up getting much better. I've seen kids go from horrendous flying 10s to, in a few years, getting pretty respectable times because we really dedicated to timing their splits.
And so when we're looking at speed development there, what are the big things you guys are putting your time and emphasis into as far as developing that speed? Is it 10-yard sprints, 40s? Yep. What are you guys doing?
So we're always measuring a 10-yard split. We're just progressively over the weeks of the program increasing the fly-in distance. We're always doing a fly-in, meaning like we're never going to put our hand on a timer. They're going to always get at least a 5-yard head start. So on week 1, they're doing a 15-yard sprint. Cut 2 or 3 of them every workout. Now, the next week, one of those reps is going to go back 5 yards. And then the next week, it's going to go back another 5 yards, right? So then by the end of a 12-week session, these kids are running 35-yard flies. and running through the timer. So what we're getting in that is a natural training effect where they're increasing their velocity because they're having a longer fly-in, and they're increasing their volume, their total distance that they run. So we're getting a training effect that way. And what that does for us, besides creating just a natural loading effect, essentially, is we're reducing the incidence of things like hamstring strains or hip flexor strains in training because they're starting at lower velocities and volumes. I think where we could run into trouble is like if we had them run 40s from the first day, we're going to see kids come up there like, oh, my hip flexor, my hamstring, my calf, whatever it is. But if we're slowly introducing the speeds and volumes to a lot of these athletes over time, we don't really see injuries pop up, but we are seeing speeds increase. And then we'll track them over the entire time they're with us for years. So I can have all their numbers and compare their 5 yards, their 10s, their 15s, their 20s, and so on to see their progress.
Okay. And so you're saying, like, if they have a flying where they can kind of like gradually increase their speed before that gate starts to time them, you see a reduced risk of injuries there?
Yeah, just because like if they're not hitting as high of a velocity and they're not getting as much total volume. So it's just like, adding load and volume in the weight room, right? We're slowly kind of introducing them to higher loads. And so that's been really, really good for us. And it allows us kind of a natural training effect.
Nice. And then anything else you guys are doing besides increasing the volume of that sprint distance or the length?
Yeah, so we're also doing loaded sprinting. So typically after the first phase, we'll introduce sled pulling on one of the days. And so one day will be more of like a higher velocity day. The other day will be more of with the sled pulling will be more of an acceleration focused day. And so what we're going to do, we're going to get like a belt. They're going to have a drag sled behind them. And what we want to do is find a load that allows them to run at a 50% decrement. So they've already been running a phase of flying 10s. I know what their 10-yard split is. I want to find a load that slows them down by about 50%. When you look at the research from J.B. Marin and some of these other researchers, that tends to be about the sweet spot from a force production standpoint for a lot of these athletes. And so it's got a little bit of trial and error and have them run. We still time their split. They run through the timer, but they're just pulling the sled behind them.
And they should be about 50% slower.
Yep.
Double time. Okay.
Yep. So, yeah. And so that has been really good for us for an acceleration development standpoint. Now, with the really young kids, we might just totally skip that because they might be running so slow to begin with. Like if they're running like a 1.6 10-yard split, there's no sense in slowing them down and increasing their ground contact time anymore. Yeah. But once the kids get to high school and they're moving a little bit quicker, it becomes a really valuable tool for us.
Yeah. Do you know if the research has changed on that over the years? I remember when I was an undergrad, I had Art. What was his last name? He was in North Andover, actually. But he said like parachute runs like didn't work. Mm-hmm. There's nothing behind it, and like weighted stuff didn't work. But I take it that's changed.
Yeah. There's been some really good research. Like I said, J.B. Marin being one of them. Ken Clark, really, really good researcher about its impact primarily is on acceleration, not necessarily top speed mechanics. But again, going back to team sport athletes, acceleration being a huge, valuable asset for us. It can have a pretty big impact.
Do you guys do any like contrast runs, like sprint down with the sled and then sprint back without?
Not necessarily in that context, but we will do contrast work with sprinting as it relates sometimes to like heavily loaded sled pushing and sprinting, or weight room pairing with either plyometric work with the weight room or sprinting with some of the weight room work.
Interesting. Is there a reason you guys don't do just like a...
I think mainly just for fear of things like hamstring fatigue, hamstring strains. Also, space is really more of an issue. I think when you're in the Northeast, like I have indoors in this time of the year, I have like a couple lanes that are 40 yards with 12 kids. So I'm like, just the logistical standpoint becomes more of a challenge than anything.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so part of that too is like so we have to work on sprinting and all that in strength. Now, from a conditioning perspective too, what are the things that make up an optimal conditioning program for kids? Because we have, I think the hardest part is sometimes we have these parents that want their kids doing everything all the time, and it's like, okay, they're wrestling 5 days a week already. It's like, and then you're sending him here to strength train 3 days a week. And then you're telling me he's gassed in his competition. But he hasn't had a day off in like months, and he's training twice a day. Maybe he doesn't need more conditioning. Maybe he needs fucking rest.
Yeah. Who would have thought?
So, this is more for the parents, I guess, of what should someone have, or what should someone be looking at for a good conditioning program for their kid?
It's funny you say that, because we actually had a parent they had 2 kids, 2 boys, up to Middleton a few weeks ago. And they came in for their first session. Like, we were easy on them. We didn't completely let them loaf, but like we kind of eased them into it, and they conditioned. And the dad called and was like, "Hey, my kids were able to walk around when they came home. They weren't passed out. You got to push them harder next time." And these are kids that are playing a club hockey team. They're skating all the time. And I'm like, "Are you trying to kill your kids?" And they're missing the fact that, like, from a conditioning and energy system development standpoint, practice and playing is energy system development, as specific as it gets. And so I think that now, especially, like I said, with this all year round sports model is so prevalent, you have to really have a lot of great communication with the athletes, the coaches, hopefully the parents, as to what are the demands that these kids have when they're not with us, because many of them are coming with a really high aerobic capacity. There's no need for a lot of basic low intensity conditioning, because these kids are playing their sport and practicing all the time. Their aerobic bucket is generally pretty full. Now, is there a demand for maybe a little bit of glycolytic work or like interval based conditioning? Yes, I think so, provided that they don't have to go to a game after that. They didn't come from one prior to that, and they don't necessarily have a big game the next day. And so those are conversations that you have to have. And so when I have a group of athletes, I'll speak with each one of them and say, "Hey, I need to kind of know what your week looks like. If you're seeing me, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, or Monday, Wednesday, whatever it is, what does our practice schedule look like? What is the intensity of those practices each day? Because they can vary really greatly. And what does your game schedule look like? And where do we think we can maybe fit in conditioning work if it is necessary?" And that's the biggest thing that I think has changed for us since I first started. There was just much less competing demands outside of the weight room from when I first started till now. And so maybe we're conditioning hard one day a week, and then the other days we might not be doing anything, because they're going to leave and go have a hard skate, or they're going to get bagged by their coach, and then they have a game on the weekend. So it's like, okay, maybe we'll get our interval-based work on the airline bike today, on Monday, and then Wednesday you're not going to do much, and then you're going to have a game Friday and Saturday. So if that's how it works, great.
We can't win as coaches, because then that same dad that got mad at you for not pushing his kid hard enough is going to be mad at you because he looked like shit in his game the next day.
Yeah, and I'm like, yeah, exactly. And it's trying to explain to them that, like, these kids, there's not an endless amount of work that we can pour into the bucket. At some point, they're not going to be able to perform the way they need to if we continue to stress them over and over. And some parents get that sooner than others. And sometimes I always tell them, hey, like, you can go try somewhere else. Often they come back and trying to explain to them that, like, hey, I have your kid's best interest in mind. And typically as they mature with us over time, those parents will buy in, but there's only so much you can do.
I feel like there's this like view too, that you send your kid to the gym, or just you even start training, and it's like, yeah, there's an expectation that you need to get beat down. You need to train as hard as you can. Yeah, you shouldn't be able to walk out the door. You should be too tired to go play with your friends after, or whatever the case may be. And that you're going to get all these jacked muscles and, lose all this weight or whatever. But really, as a strength coach, like, that's not what we're trying to do.
No.
Like, we're getting touch points of, I think people need to be reminded, like, our big thing is, like, can we increase their safety?
100%.
On the fields. Like, more than anything, we're trying to reduce injuries.
Yep.
And then maybe we'll get some performance outside of that. But do you think people's visions are skewed like I do?
Yeah, so what I always say is, okay, number one, we keep them safe in the training environment. No injuries. Number two, we reduce the incidence of injuries on the field of play. Those are the two number one priorities. Number 3, we improve performance. And I think in reality, as a strength conditioning coach, you can take somebody up 1, maybe 2 levels from their genetic potential in their genetic environment. If you're able to do that, you've done a really, really good job. Like, I'm a great example. I showed up at MBSC. I'm not a particularly explosive, powerful person. Mike will tell you I had the worst vertical jump of like any intern that's ever come to MBSC. I can consistently jump over 30 all the time now, but I'm never going to be like a 35-inch vertical jump. I'm never going to be a sub 1 second flying 10. That's just not how I'm built, right? But you can make people better. But I think sometimes where that becomes the hardest struggle with parents is when they might not have the most realistic perspective on where their child might sit on that spectrum of performance, and telling them like, hey, our number 1 job is to keep your kid healthy and to make him or her the best athlete they can be, right? If you go, it's the book The Genius in All of Us, I think, and it says like our result is, it's genetics times environment, right? And so if you're a genetic 5 and your environment's a 10 and it's perfect, you're doing everything right, you can be a 50, right? If your genetics are a 10 and your environment is 1, you still might be a 100. You might be a 10, but if you're a 5, if your environment's a 5, you're a 50, right? And so we can only go as far as our genetics, allow us to. But that might mean a college scholarship for a kid. That might mean a really great high school career for a kid, right? If you're someone like me. And that might also mean a love of strength training and understanding how to take care of themselves the rest of their life, which is probably the most important thing they get out of it. And so trying to kind of get the big picture across to parents sometimes is a challenge, but getting them, typically, if you can buy into a great relationship with the kid and the kid loves you and loves coming, then hopefully everything else kind of takes care of itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything you said there. And I think that I had the thought as you were talking of, the goal with performance-based training or athletic development is not to make a kid super tired and beat down.
No.
Like, if you're doing it right, we should be giving them the minimal effective dose to find what gets them that extra notch up over time. And I think this is something like, you see them like the bodybuilding dads at the gym, like grinding and grunting these reps of whatever they're doing with horrible form. And I came from like a bodybuilding background. I used to do that. And then like, as I got into competitive Olympic weightlifting, the longer I did it, the more it's like, yeah, you know what? I'm not going to kill it on this one because I don't want to be tired and sore for tomorrow's workout. I want to have a good training session tomorrow too.
Yeah, you're trying to stack those great sessions on top of each other over time. And that's the wisdom of somebody who's been doing this for a long period of time.
We don't need to be at a 10 out of 10 all the time. It's like if we consistently stay at a 7, we'll probably have a better outcome. And showing up and not getting hurt and not being beat down and not getting beat up by your coach because or him yelling at you because you look like shit because your strength coach made you tired. So, I think those are all great points that people just need to hear. I guess you got to go soon, so we'll wrap up with one more thing. What is your view as a massage therapist and someone that practices massage still? Actually, I have 2 more questions. Back to one. Slide board training for hockey players. Is that a big mistake that a lot of them are making these days if they're doing it?
We use it, but not in season. Because they're already skating so much. I think it's a really valuable tool when we have things like adductor or sports hernia rehab. It's a great conditioning tool to get people moving in the frontal plane. If you think about most of our conditioning options are all really sagittal plane focused, running, biking, things like that. It's a great tool that's specific to skating, but when you already have people who are skating all the time, I think it could be too much of a good thing. Typically, these guys and girls are coming into us and they're sore from spending a lot of time on the ice. So if that's the case, I'm not going to put them on a slide board. But we even use it with our Gen Pop clients because it's just, for them, it's like, oh, this is something different than hopping on the bike or running or pushing the sled or whatever it might be. So I think it's a good tool depending on when you use it. It can be too much of a good thing for people who are already getting a lot of frontal plane work in their day-to-day activity.
Yeah, absolutely. So back to massages here. It was funny because anytime I go get a massage, and I'm super stiff. I probably should stretch more. But every massage therapist, I was like, oh my God, you have all these knots and you're so tight everywhere. And patients come to me all the time and they're told the same thing of like, they said I have all these knots and they need to work them out. And then I need to go for regular maintenance like once a week for a while. And so I actually went and got a massage for the first time the other day. And she didn't say that to me, which was nice. But she knows I'm a physical therapist. She knows I have a practice. She's like, can we get you in like 6 weeks from now? And I was like, that sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
But I was also like, do you think someone should have to rely on a massage to keep themselves or their tissue healthy?
I don't think they necessarily have to rely on it. I think it can be a useful tool to reduce the resting tone or change the neurological sensitivity in an area that allows them to continue to train or compete at whatever intensity that they want, right? And so like you talk about the typical verbiage you hear people use, scar tissue, knots, adhesions, right? And those are the lay people's way to try to make sense of something that they feel that they don't understand.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's much easier to try to picture in their head that there's an actual physical thing in that tissue that needs to be worked apart. Right.
Yeah.
And that's not going to happen. And if it did, then you're going to be in a lot more pain probably. And so what I try to liken it to when I talk to people is it's like I'm looking at the dimmer switch on my wall across the way right here. I said, like, when you feel a lot of tension in there, not necessarily DOMS, like muscle soreness, but like tension in an area, it's like your nervous system is like a dimmer switch, right? And there's more resting contraction in that tissue. The only thing that can change quickly, like say you foam roll your hip and you're like, oh, it feels a little bit better. Or you get a massage, you get up off the table, you're like, oh, my hip or my back feels a little bit better. The only thing that can change that quickly is your nervous system, right? Yeah. The tissue doesn't change shape. And so what I try to tell them is like, hey, what I'm using is a skill to reduce the resting tone in that area so that then you're able to go and do the things you need to do and feel better and be more willing to go and train hard. Or when I get off that table, when I see a client, then let's capitalize on that neurological window of opportunity where we're going to start to get that joint moving through a free range of motion. We're going to develop some load tolerance in that area because you feel better. And then we're going to try to stack the intensity of what we're doing on top of that. And so I always tell people like, hey, that's what I'm here to help you do. And in reality, like you said, hey, see you in 6 weeks. Like, it's not like the chiropractor is like, hey, I need to see you 4 times a week for 15 minutes. Yeah. It's like, hey, let me know when you need me. That's what I'm here for. And I'm going to hopefully get you a path to where you need me less. Yep. Because sometimes the conversation, like I'll have people who want to come see me all the time. I said, maybe the better conversation is, what does your training plan look like? Yeah. Why do you feel like you need to see me multiple times per week? Because I could probably save you a lot of time and money if we maybe adjust how you train, and you're going to feel a lot better. And often that's a much more productive conversation if you can get them to have that. Yeah.
I tell people the same thing. I'm like, look, I'll gladly take your money and rub you down every week for if that's what you want to do and you don't want to do the exercise or whatever. But yeah, this is the way we need to shape things a little bit differently within your lifestyle and training. But
yeah.
Anyways, man, I know you got to run, so we'll let you go. But before that, where can people find you if they want to reach out?
Yeah, probably social media. At Movement is Medicine is my Instagram, where I'll put most of the training content. At Certified FSC is where you're going to see all of our courses, continuing education options. And so that'd probably be the best place to get a hold of me.
This dude's got like 5 websites, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll try to put them in the show notes.
Yeah.
So people can find them if they're looking for them. So check there. Anyways, Kevin, thanks for coming on, and it was great having you.
Thanks for having me, Brett. Appreciate it. Have a great weekend.
You too.
84% of you that listen to this podcast frequently do not hit the follow button. If you've enjoyed any of these episodes, could you do us a favor and hit the follow button, leave a rating, and maybe leave us a review? It helps this channel more than you know, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests get. If you'd like to know more about training in person or online with Brett's gym, Architect Fitness, please follow us on social at ARKITECT Fitness on Instagram, or visit ARKITECTFitness.com. Or if you want to rehab with barbell therapy online or in person, check out @barbell.therapy or visit barbelltherapyandperformance.com. Thank you for taking the time to listen.